Hello again, everyone. This is another one of my expert interviews. Samantha, Tonge here, Labrakeeter Marketing. And today I'm speaking to someone who used to be my boss. This is Ieuan, and we're going to be talking about about B2B marketing and how it differs from B2C marketing and kind of things that you need to think about. So Ieuan, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, good morning, Samantha. So yeah, Ieuan Compton. I've been doing B2B marketing in construction products in particular for nearly 30 years. Been around the block a few times, worked for a few multinational companies. Still excited by it, still get really sort of in amongst the weeds, and yeah, still get a bit of a buzz from it. Still love it. And you're quite right, I did used to manage Samantha. Geez, that was the best part of 15 years ago.
Must be, yeah.
And it was a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. So today we're talking about B2B. So if you don't know, B2B stands for business to business. And yeah, so Ieuan, what do you think the key differences / similarities there are between B2B marketing and B2C, which is business to consumer?
Yeah, so I had to think about this question prior to the interview, or prior to this recorded meeting, and I'm not sure there is a huge difference. I think there is difference in approaches, but I think in terms of we as individuals, whether we're buying for personal use as a consumer or whether we're buying for business use as a business user, we still buy people. We still look to get something that we deem is value for money and will do what we expect it to do. So in that respect, I think there are quite a lot of similarities. I think that people buy people first and foremost, and I can be switched off a purchase by an individual more than anything else. And I have been known to walk out of shops and go buy the same product at another shop that's more expensive, because I've preferred the salesperson or the approach of the salesperson. And I think post-COVID and post-lockdown and post everyone's working from home, I think we've also seen a shift. I think that one-to-one relationship, or that feeling of a one-to-one relationship, is probably far more important now than it ever has been, because we crave a little bit of human interaction.
Yes, especially after the last 2 years of being stuck in the house and not speaking to people face to face. It's been a bit more, I think it's changed all sorts of things. I think a lot of people probably haven't re-looked at their brand that need to now, because things have changed.
And they fundamentally have changed. You know, our attitude towards brands has also changed. I think we were certain products were less brand loyal than perhaps we needed to be before, or not needed to be, but perhaps were before. And that's because we've spent a lot of time purchasing stuff over the internet, and we go online, do a search for, I don't know, a Makita drill, for example, and we get, oh yeah, use Makita drill, but use different models, use a different model, use a different brand, but you might also be interested in these. And people who looked at this also went on to buy that. And I think our brand loyalty will have diminished a little bit because we're given so much choice.
Yeah, that's also an excellent point. And one thing I have come up when I'm talking to B2B clients is they think that, like you've spoken about, people still buy people still want something that works for them. I think one thing that a lot of B2B people I speak to think is, especially in my industry where it's technical, a lot of really technical people, is they think that it's about facts. Give them the facts, the big data sheets that gives them everything, and then they'll know exactly how wonderful my product is. Sometimes it takes some convincing them that no, okay, firstly you want to catch their attention before they're even going to look at your data sheet. That's somewhere down the line. And secondly, emotion is actually important in business to business.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think technical industries in particular tend to be quite guilty of going, here's our product, this is what it's made of, this is what it does, this is how it does it, this is what you need to watch out for, here's the health and safety assessment, here's the LCA document, here's all the technical information that we've got because we love and invest in our product and we think it's wonderful.
Yeah.
And whereas you as the purchaser are going, yeah, but how does it help me?
Yeah.
Just give me that nugget. Just tell me that if I use this product, I haven't got to do X, Y, or Z, or if I do X, Y, and Z, I get a much better performance because of A, B, and C. And we all, as marketeers, we all at some point in our career will have fallen into that trap of talking about the product and why it's wonderful and not actually telling the customer why it's good to have the product and what benefits it brings to them.
Yeah, what does it actually mean to them? Why you?
Yeah.
And it isn't necessarily, it isn't this widget does X, Y, and Z. It's how that helps the customer. So it could be like at the moment, I guess a lot of people are looking for things that will save them energy because it will save them money, because that's a big issue.
I've got a very good example. It's a B2C example, but for my 50th birthday, my wife said, I'm going to buy you a new turntable. You love your music. Let's go and buy a decent turntable. And we went to this music hi-fi shop in Nottingham. And the guy said, right, when you come in, bring some of your records with you. And what we'll do is we'll sit you in a room and we'll play different turntables with your amplifier, with different speakers, and we'll work out what makes your music sound the best. And it may not be the most expensive turntable, it might be a cheaper one and all this sort of stuff. And we spent an hour and a half in this man's shop with him just swapping in and out turntables, listening to my music and going, well, that one sounds better than that one. That one sounds better than that one. And in the end, I didn't buy a particularly expensive turntable from them. It was a good quality mid-range one. But I did go back and buy a set of speakers from him. And I have gone back since and bought other components from him.
Yeah. Because
he spent the time and wasn't forceful or pushing, but said, this is kind of, a turntable is a turntable. You put the arm on the record and it plays music. Well, actually, that's the B2B trap. It's a turntable, it plays records, it's wonderful. The actual softer bit, the what did it do for me, was it made some records that I love sound even better than they did before. And he sold me. He sold to me. Most pleasurable sales experience I've ever had.
That's amazing. And in retail, experience is going to become more and more important.
Indeed. Yeah. Well, it might become true of B2B as well. Because
probably,
we're now physically having less contact. It may be that visitor centres, experience centres, bricks and mortar showrooms for construction products will become more popular. Again, I'm going to put a caveat on this. This also depends on the audience. Certain audience types, and you'll find this with a technical sell, is that typically they're not extroverts. They don't crave the human contact. They might be less likely to go to a visitor centre. But I think we will see an upsurge in that type of physical infrastructure to support sales activities.
Yeah, which brings me on to talking about this is dependent on the audience. That kind of brings me on to how we should go about segmentation and positioning in B2B.
Yeah, that's again, this is something that if you read the textbooks, a lot of people talk about, but actually you don't see it all that often, which is why I think a lot of marketing activity kind of gets not lost and confused, but it gets devalued in the business because this process hasn't been followed. I would nearly always advocate for mapping out the entire purchase process. Yes. So if you're selling a building product, and I'm going to it's my experience building products. If you look at a building product, it's specified by an architect. It's then value engineered by a main contractor. It's then fitted by a subcontractor. And it's then used by the client of the building and maintained by the facilities management team. So you've got lots of different stakeholders on that journey.
Yeah.
All of which might have a slightly different message as to why your product is wonderful.
Yes.
The architect will like it because it's aesthetically pleasing and allows him to, allows his creative juices to go absolutely crazy. But then the services guy at the other end of the chain, he wants to know that once it's installed, he hasn't got to touch it for 30 years. And if he has got to touch it, there's no health and safety implications, no disposal implications, or it's easy to do. Whereas the contractor's interested in price and installation time, the subcontractor wants to know that if he installs it and there's a problem, he's not going to get a call back. And there's all these different messages for the same product by different audience types.
Yes.
And then even if you go, let's just pick on the architect for a second, because it's fun to pick on architects. There are different types of architects. You've got creative architects who design wild and wacky buildings and pass it off to an engineer to make work. And then you've got real practical architects who want to get involved in the technical detailing. And you see, you've even got different messages within the architect audience.
Yeah.
That answers the question, doesn't it?
I think that's very common in B2B. That's not just construction. I think that's pretty much, there are multiple people involved. Not just at the decision-making stage, although even at the decision-making stage, you've got the person who signs it off, who might not even be the person that you're talking to. You've got the person that you're talking to, and then there are all sorts of other influencers as well. And like you say, they've all got slightly different needs, and a lot of marketers also forget, like you say, the customer journey. As it happens, I've recently mapped mine out again because it's changed slightly. And yeah, they're different. So for me, for example, this is quite different. But I've got there'll be marketing directors, there'll be finance people who are about cutting costs and why marketing. They might see it as a cost, not an investment. So I've got to educate them. There are managing directors and CEOs who have their point of view. You've got, and within engineering, there'll be, the engineering manager, but then there'll be the purchasing department. They're all, and their targets are all about cutting costs. And then you've got, so even just at that stage, you've got, and like you've got all these different people, and like you say, there are all these other influencers further down the line. And you might be thinking, oh yeah, but they're not part of the decision-making process, but that feeds back up.
Exactly. So just on your point there about the different influences you've got in your business. Yeah. You've got the finance person, you've got the marketing person, you might also have the MD. They all speak a slightly different language.
Yeah.
The accountant will be talking about return on investment and KPIs and all these different business acronyms that we seem to love and cherish. And that language will be quite different to the MD. The MD wants to know how you're going to affect my bottom line. Yeah. The marketing director wants to know how you're going to make his life easier and make him look good, make them look good. So the language is different as well. And that kind of then brings on to the next step. Once you've got this customer journey and you've identified the different segments you want to talk to, you've then got to build a persona or a personality map or something that says, okay, I'm going to target this type of architect. This is their education background. This is the language and the phrases they like. These are the things that motivate them.
Yes.
And in the case of a creative architect, it will be, we're going to give you something that makes it really easy for you to be individual and create something that is going to be there for a lifetime. There's a legacy piece. So they've all got different drivers.
Yep.
And actually capturing that at the very start of the process allows you to tailor your messages, allows you to tailor your marketing campaigns directly to them with a bit more impact and with a higher chance of success. And sometimes we get it wrong and they're not, the persona is slightly wrong. We've got the messaging quite wrong, but that's where you test and trial and go back and you adapt it. But if you always go back to that source point, then life becomes a bit easier.
Definitely. And it's not just a lot of people think of you know, marketing, this sort of thing would just be, oh yeah, getting the ads right, getting the social media right, but every single touch point, because if it falls down when they speak to your finance department and it puts them off, or they everyone needs to understand what the message needs to be, or what the messages are, and everyone needs to understand what their place in it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can work both ways as well. You know, I've started with this user journey and talked about architects at one end and clients at the other. Actually, the clients can sometimes be the influencer. So if you think of new build housing, for example, when we as consumers walk into a show home, we typically look at the kitchen and the bathroom and that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And then we have requests. So the house builder, we might go, oh, we want one of those fancy cooker taps. And it may be something they've not thought about, but that then goes back up the chain. And at some point it will hit the right department and they'll go, well, we've had a number of people asking for this fancy cooker tap. And they'll then start to incorporate it. So it can go both ways. And in particular with construction, the subcontractor may not like using your product because there's something unique about it. And they may have a preference for a competitor's product. And they might then go, okay, I know you specified this product, but we can give you this one. It's roughly the same. And it can, the chain can work both ways.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And even if it's the same people, even if you're dealing with the same influencers sort of at the end as well as the beginning, you need to give them that confidence that they've made the right choice.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think of an example of where, I suppose, you know, IBM years ago had the strapline, didn't they? No one ever got sacked for buying IBM.
Yeah.
They probably did in the end because it cost them a small fortune, but at the time they were probably right. And there was a comfort that came with buying that big brand in a time where there was some uncertainty and some lack of knowledge, lack of expertise around those types of bits of kit. And sometimes that's the marketing message. Sometimes the message is just, hey, look, we've been doing this for 50 years. You can trust us. Look at all these wonderful buildings.
Yeah.
In the case of construction, that have used this product. And we should never underestimate the value of a case study.
Yes. Plus case studies is, like in B2C, there's lots of storytelling and there are lots of ways to do that. In B2B, I think the fact that case studies are a story is part of the, as well as that sort of confidence building in your product. It's also something that you're telling in story form, which is more engaging. So I think it's one of the reasons it's one of the best performing pieces of content in B2B marketing. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and it starts with, if they're done properly by non-technical people or technical people who have woken up to the fact that they've got to sell the benefits, it starts with a problem statement. On this building, we wanted something that was non-combustible because of this. And the client came to us and we gave them this solution because our product does that, etc. And, you know, there is a story to be told, and the story always starts with a problem statement. The specifier wanted something because they had to overcome a problem.
Yeah.
And that problem could be as minor as they wanted something green in the kitchen, or it could be something as major as they wanted to stop the building burning down.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, that's very true. And I think this is one of the, and I think to a certain extent, it's a bit of where there's a bit of a difference between B2B and B2C, with the exception of certain things, because I think automotive is the main one where people do more research after they've made the purchase than before they've made the purchase. But within B2B, especially if you're talking about something that could make a building fall down, or, you know, in or a big piece of engineering that you know they need to keep the production going, or the, you know, you're talking about people whose job could be on the line, or their, you know, that promotion may or may come not come based on the purchase they make. So there's quite a lot at stake in a lot of business to business sales.
It's also somebody else's money.
Yes, yeah.
And therefore you're always going to have a bit more scrutiny than if you're spending your money.
Yeah.
And your automotive example is quite a good one. If I was to go out and buy a car, I would buy it on the comfort, on the sound system or whatever. Whereas if I was being given a company car, there'd be a different set of criteria, different set of value propositions being attached to that vehicle. And so again, it's a very good example of the user journey. The user journey for a consumer is very different to a business user. A business user would be looking at the resale value, the leasing costs, the running costs, and all that type of stuff. Whereas a consumer's going, does it come in that lovely shade of orange that I want?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think so there is a bit of a difference there in most, different criteria, and it's different emotions involved. It's different criteria that people have in B2B compared to B2C, but the basics are the same. That same structure, same things you've got to think about. But I think in most cases, there's a lot more that needs to be done at the end of the customer journey and, after the purchase than maybe usually needs to be done in B2C, except for it's just the same, bring them back again, get them to buy another Mars bar, whereas B2B, you need to get them to think they've made the right decision. And then like you say, I guess your record shop is a good example. You've gone back to that, you've got that confidence in that shop now, so you will go back for anything related. And even if it's like a huge purchase, you tend to sell to one customer once every 20 years. It's this big piece of machinery or something. Don't talk to other people in their industry. Absolutely.
I have recommended the record shop. I've said to friends, I bought this turntable. These guys were superb. This was the experience I got. And you're quite right. I don't know if any of my friends have gone to the shop to purchase, but that word of mouth has happened, and that happens in industry as well. That happens in B2B. Somebody on a building site might be using the Makita drill that I used at the start of the conversation, and they might say to their mate who needs a new drill, well, I've had a Makita drill for 10 years. I've replaced the brushes twice a day, whatever the message might be. And they then might go and buy a Makita drill, or at least look more favourably when they're looking at the options at the Makita, because Dave, their mate, has told them that it's a good drill, as opposed to an advert in a magazine telling them it's a good drill, that we all go, yeah, you would say that, wouldn't you? But Dave hasn't got that vested interest. Yes,
and you've and the other thing in B2B you've got to think about is the fact that most industries are quite incestuous in terms of the people they employ. So take an engineering manager, for example, moves from one factory to another, and they've got the same problems that I had at the previous place. I know who to call, the people that helped me before. They're also, we talked about case studies, if they're happy with you and you've done all that confidence building after the purchase as well and done things for them, they're far more likely to go, I'm happy to put my name against a case study. Yeah, absolutely. And there's an interesting twist in that one then. If you've done all the selling, if you've gone to the specifier and you've built that rapport and that relationship and you've sold them on your solution, if you then move business, which does happen, the chances are you're going to take that client with you because they trust you. And as long as you've got the right solutions for them, they're going to stick with you. We tend to be loyal to individuals. So the shop that I bought my turntable from, that's just a shell that sells bits of electronic equipment. It was the guy in the shop that spent the time with me, talked me through and explained stuff to me that I've actually got a relationship with and I'm loyal to. I will go back to him because I trust him that if I'm going to spend an obscene amount of money on a piece of electronics, that he will give me something that I'm going to get value from and not just rip me off and take my money. Which again sort of brings us back a little bit. I mentioned, it could fall down with the finance, when it gets to the finance department, it's the wrong message and they put them off. But it's you need to make sure that everyone in the business and every new person that joins the business understands what your brand is, what your messaging is, what is you're saying special about you, so that hopefully you've got a better chance of retaining customers as well as winning new ones.
Well, absolutely, and there are tools for that. So as part of the user journey, obviously you've segmented all the individuals, and as we've said, all of these individuals have got their own motivations for buying products and choosing products. And actually what you do is you build up a message house that says, okay, so the lead performance for our product might be, I don't know, fire performance. Okay, so what does that mean to the creative architect? What does that mean to the accountant? What does that mean to the subcontractor? What does that mean? You know, and you build up the messages, but they all link back to the one message. So no matter who's getting the message at what stage of the journey, and the language might be different that you use, but they're all getting this product is good when it comes to fire. And so the message house is a relatively common marketing tool that allows you to have that consistency, and that message house then would get replicated across all different media types, whether that be a printed advert in a magazine, to your website, to a video, or to a CBD presentation being given at a trade show.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you know, your new sales guys are trained up on this, so they do cut. So take that shop, for example. Say that's an employee you were dealing with. I imagine he might be the owner, but let's say he's an employee, and next time you go in, it's a different guy, but exactly the same approach. Then you're still happy to go back to that shop.
Yes. Yeah, and it would be any change in behaviour that would then start to devalue that brand. So you're quite right, that consistency is quite important. And that message is, you know, even more so in construction now, because post Grenfell, there's added scrutiny on us as an industry, and we need, and we should there's a requirement for us to be honest, open, transparent, and with understandable messages to the audience types. And you know, there is talk of competency schemes and auditing schemes and all types of stuff that's going to affect the technical way that we write about our products. You know, and I'm going to use the word fire again. You know, fireproof doesn't really exist, but it's a phrase that we hear quite. Oh yeah, this is fireproof. Well, is anything really fireproof at a high enough temperature? Most things burn. So therefore, fireproof doesn't technically exist, but it's a language that marketeers will have used for the past 20, 30 years. And actually now what we talk about is fire resistance or resistance to fire. And the language is changing as the legislative landscape and as we culturally change. So,
because people took that literally.
Well, I think there was a general lack of understanding. Or in certain parts there was a lack of understanding. There was also a case of marketers being overzealous with their language, and you know, and again that comes back to where the message house can come quite handy. If it says this is what you say, you don't say this because it's not true.
And sales guys as well, not just marketers.
Yeah,
you make sure they don't promise more than we can deliver, please.
That's the other challenge now, is we're all salespeople.
Yeah.
You know, most people are on social media.
True. Yeah.
And they will be sometimes commenting, they will be sharing their company updates and bits and pieces. So we've kind of all become salespeople to a lesser or greater degree. And you're quite right, that consistency of message across all of those channels by all of those individuals is critically important.
Yeah. And I think, like you say, even more so now, as more people are more comfortable. I mean, I thought LinkedIn was pretty busy before lockdown. It has got, I mean, it's so much, it's so busy now. It's so much harder to get your message across on LinkedIn than it was before. I thought everyone was on there already. No. And people are much more comfortable discussing things in that sort of more relaxed way. But it's seen by the public. So you need to, I mean, before lockdown, there was already research that, you know, the best performing companies were ones where everyone in the business understood what it stood for and what, you know, they meant to the customers. that's probably, and it's something I hadn't really thought about until you mentioned it, that's probably multiplied.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. I think we talked early on about the lack of physical interaction with people. So we're doing more stuff socially, we're doing more stuff by video, we're doing more stuff by direct message and chats, we're doing more stuff by having conversations around topic posts. Because as human beings, we even the introverted ones amongst us still require a little bit of human interaction,
yeah,
in order to function and develop and learn. And I think that social media, particularly, and LinkedIn is a very good example. It was always a very, it can sound odd, but it was a stuffy, very formal type platform. It's relaxed a bit, and now as individuals we're showing that we're human beings.
Yes.
They're still linked to work loosely every now and again, but there is a bit more softer content on there that says, I'm an individual, I'm doing this with my company, I'm walking up Scarfell Pike 3 times backwards in a pair of wellies and a bikini, whatever it might be, whatever. But people are showing their personalities.
Yeah.
Which then stems back to the very, very start of this conversation, people by people.
Yeah.
And what we are seeing on LinkedIn is that people are getting more savvy, and they are targeting a particular segment of their audience and being very specialist, being very, very focused and very targeted, and not chasing 20,000 impression views, but chasing half a dozen real valuable ones that they can build off.
Quality over quantity.
Absolutely. And in a noisy space like LinkedIn has become more so. I mean, it's not as noisy as Facebook, it never will be. But in a noisy space, if you can carve out that niche and become the specialist, the voice, the expert, then your audience will gravitate towards you, because we're all relatively curious to a lesser or greater degree, and we go searching for stuff. And if you're talking in that niche, they will find you and follow you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point to sort of finish up, really, because I think that's what it boils down to at the end of the day. Finding that niche. It doesn't have to be tight. It needs to be big enough that you get enough money from it, but small enough that you can target your messaging more easily. It will make your life a lot easier.
Yeah, there'd be no point targeting somebody that's looking for a burnt orange car that does 100 miles to the gallon, that has leather seats and 3 exhaust pipes, because you're just not going to find that niche. But you are going to find someone that's looking for an energy efficient car in a lurid color.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Okay. And just before we go, do you happen to have anything to plug?
Not really. No, I'm doing this out of the goodness of my heart. If somebody wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm more than happy. They can find me. It's Ieuan Compton. What I don't like is people connecting and sending me sales messages.
Yeah.
But I'm more than happy to connect and have a conversation and interact.
Brilliant. I shall put your LinkedIn link on the website then when I publish it. Brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for watching.